as we do every day, 4 o'clock. Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. Scott Grayson, follow him on Twitter, of course, from 97.3 ESPN.com and Fox 29 Philadelphia sports anchor. Covers the Eagles, Grayson's grades during the football season, of course. And right now, during today's edition of Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live by Gil Hunter Brody and Scott Grayson joining us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as the Eagles now kind of post-off-season draft. You got that second wave of free agency, or third wave really, kind of possibly down here. We'll get Scott's takes on some of the moves they've made, some of the things they still need to do, as Scott Grayson joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. What's going on, Scott?
Hey, just hanging through this whole quarantine thing like everyone else. How you holding up, Mike?
Yeah, man, we're doing our best, trying to do our part in keeping people entertained and informed. And let's look at some of the things. First off, let's start with today. Adam Kaplan on the Inside the Birds podcast, the most recent one. I want to play a bite from that so we can all kind of listen in on it. Had this to say about what is going on with the Eagles right now in a piece that they might still need to add. Take a listen.
They're going to they want to sign a veteran running back, Jeff. They want two or three things out of that back. They want volume. What does that mean? They're not looking for a scat back. They want a power back who could probably handle if Sanders can't play. They'd like to get a guy who could handle 12 to 15 carries. They like that back to have a little bit better versatility than, let's say, LeGarrette Blount had. Blount was just simply not going to catch the football. He didn't do that. And they like a guy also to give Miles Sanders a spell during the game. And the guy that I know they have some interest in, and we'll see if it happens, is a guy that's really, really talented. Now, the problem is Carlos Hyde's been on 4 teams in the last.
So there you go. Carlos Hyde is the name that he brings up as a complimentary back, maybe give Miles Sanders a chance to take a seat. I mean, is that still a piece, number one, that you feel that the Eagles need to kind of fill? And number two, a guy to fill that role?
In my opinion, I don't think it's a position they, quote-unquote, need to fill right now versus someone's. However, I do think it's a good move, and I do think it is a good addition. It fits the mold of what they would be looking to, or what they've been doing over the last few years. They like to have that guy, and then Miles Sanders really asserted himself last year, so you knew you've got your primary back, but they like to have that veteran between the tackles kind of running back who can – kind of do that job that needs to be done in there, and then let Miles do what needs to be done outside. And I think that Carlos Hyde, I think, is a great guy. You look at his he's a good fit to that position in my mind, given the fact that he doesn't turn 30 until September. So he's still, in terms of running backs, he's old, but in terms of NFL players, he's still at a decent age and perhaps has a little bit of tread left on those tires. So I think it's a good move if the Eagles go out and do it. And you can tell that it does fit perhaps the cookie-cutter kind of formula that Doug Peterson is trying to do on his offense year after year.
How would you compare Carlos Hyde to, say, somebody like Devonta Freeman, who is also still available right now?
They're both, good pickups, I think. I like what Hyde brings to perhaps this team more than Freeman. I think Freeman's more of your guy who might look to do a little more outside of the tackles. And Carlos Hyde, to me, is a LeGarrette Blount-like kind of back, perhaps a couple of years younger than Blount was when he was here in 2017. And I think that's the kind of guy these guys are looking for. And I don't think they're going to have to break the bank to get him, too, which is important. I think Freeman's not bad. I like Hyde a little bit better for this offense.
Good stuff with Scott. And, of course, I think you're right about the two different styles between, say, Freeman, more of an outside-the-tackle guy, catches the ball. Hyde is more of that grinder. He did catch the ball a little bit, as Adam mentioned in that bite. LeGarrette Blount was very one-dimensional. Hyde offers a little bit more, but he also mentioned in that bite that we didn't get to, which was LeSean McCoy. I don't know that I have a lot of interest. I don't know. Do you feel like McCoy is a good fit as like the secondary back? I mean, in the event that, let's say, Sanders was hurt for a week or two, or something happened, do you like LeSean McCoy, or would you prefer even Carlos Hyde? I think I like Hyde the best of the three.
Yeah, I like McCoy a lot. I liked McCoy a lot a few years ago more than now. he's definitely wearing down. And I hated, to see McCoy go when Chip Kelly got rid of him. All that being said, where we are now in 2020, I like Hyde as the better fit amongst all that. Again, LeSean McCoy to me is a guy who works around the outside better than he does the inside. And when you look at what this team was missing, granted injuries did a lot to this roster last year, but Carlos Hyde is that guy who can get you that third and short, that second and short yardage that you need. Now, whether or not Doug uses them, because there's been plenty of times we all scratch our head and say, why didn't Doug call, a run up the middle on 2nd down and 2 instead of a pass? But I think Carlos Hyde, out of the backs we've been talking about here, is the best fit. And honestly, I think Hyde would probably want to come here for the role that he would get.
Scott Grayson, talking a little bit about the Eagles offseason here. So you mentioned that you didn't think running back was an area that was definitively the one. What still needs to be filled, in your opinion?
Well, to me, linebacker is still a position they really need to deal with. And you can tell they've tried to address some of that. And I think that might be where some of these Clowney rumors were coming from over the last few days, was the sense that perhaps Clowney would help fill that hybrid kind of defensive end linebacker role with a veteran. They're definitely inexperienced there. And now if you want a place on the defense where you can kind of be inexperienced, perhaps that's the best spot, because you want to have that pass rush with your front four. Got to stop the run again. So in my opinion, linebacker still needs to be addressed. I think offensively this team, look, one of the things they wanted to do was get younger and get faster. Offensively, they accomplished that. Defensively, I think they've done some good things, but they still have to address, in my opinion, linebacker.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you mentioned, and we'll get to the draft a little bit deeper here with you in just a second, but that linebacker spot, I kind of agree with you on. Yeah, they drafted a guy in the 3rd round. They picked up the kid from Temple later on in the 6th round. But what they have coming in, Nate Geary, T.J. Edwards, how comfortable are you if they are still at the top of the depth chart when they kick off the season against Washington?
Yeah, I'm not really comfortable with all of that, mostly for the inexperience, the lack of veteran leadership, so to speak. With Malcolm Jenkins, when he was here, for as much as he played up on the line, he was almost a linebacker, and you would have had that. Now, I think we might see a little bit of Rodney McLeod do some of that, coming up to play closer to the line of scrimmage. But he's not a linebacker, and I think you need to have that guy, that veteran guy at that position, to command that room. You do have some young talent there, like you said, but you want to have that veteran in that film session, in that room, and to be that leader of that level. Nigel Bradham, to a certain extent, was that way. He didn't always, let his play do as much of the talking, but you need to have that kind of guy, and right now, in my opinion, they don't have it.
Who are you most comfortable with playing outside of the other side, on the other side of Darius Slay? It seems like Avante Maddox is going to be that player right now. Are you confident at his size that he will be able to do an excellent job playing the outside?
There's things I like that Avante Maddox was able to do, but there are some plays that, he just missed, and you got to wonder if he's going to take that next step in his development. And I think really, you highlighted, Hunter, the position that, in my opinion, would be certainly up for the biggest competition in training camp if they're, fortunate to have much of one, which would be that position. I think that spot will be up for grabs. You've got quite a few guys who could compete there. I think Avante Maddox certainly has as good a chance as anybody else of winning that job. But the one thing that, I think Darius Slay definitely makes the team better, and you've got to have somebody on the other side to be able to play the position as well. And one thing we saw in 2017 as well was, Patrick Robinson coming in and showing you that you got to have a good nickel. And I think that's another position. Those two positions, in my opinion, that other corner and the nickel, would be great competitions to watch if and when they do have, training camp.
What do you feel about Scott Mills and him moving to safety here? You mentioned McLeod moving up. I actually think that, and you were at the Super Bowl with me when we talked to Malcolm Jenkins, and Jenkins said, look, it's a business, and they ended up making it. And I remember we were going back and forth battling on whether or not, it made sense to bring him back. Well, they made the decision not to, obviously, hindsight 2020. Now you've got Mills, I think they're approaching Mills as saying, we want you to be our new version of Malcolm Jenkins. I think that Jim Schwartz trusts Mills more than anybody else on that defense in the secondary and is saying, I'm going to turn that role over to you.
Well, I'll answer your question this way. I like the move of him to safety. I don't necessarily like him to play that hybrid kind of role that Jenkins did. I feel like I've seen Mills miss too many tackles. And if you're going to put him up closer to the line, you want him to help stop the run on occasion, I don't know that that's his best suit. I think Rodney McLeod's a better tackler. I think Mills being in a safety position, I like the way at times he covers. And I think being able to stand back there a little further and read routes a little bit longer and chip in where he needs to in coverage, I think that's going to bode well for him. I do. I'd also like to see them put Rasul. We've been saying this for years. I'd like to see them put Rasul Douglas back there at safety as well to kind of maybe get a couple of snaps if he makes this team. I know they redid his contract. He certainly seems, and they were, putting him on the trading block. And Douglas may not be here, but I think Mills and McLeod, I like those two at safety. I think they could do well. I just don't necessarily know that I want Mills coming up to try to make some of those tackles because I felt like too many times when I was doing Grayson's grades, I was dinging him for some missed tackles.
Do you think that Will Parks would be able to maybe play that role a little bit better?
He could. I think so. Yeah, I think it's worth looking at. That's where you see, and this is where the geeks in the press and the media like to see these training camp practices and these kind of things. You really do get a chance to see some of these guys get those reps, get the chances and the opportunities to try to make those kind of plays. And I do think he might be a better fit for that kind of a role than Jalen Mills.
There's also Wallace, who they drafted this year from Clemson. Now, that I think that's way more of a project, but there seems to be, and because of where he played football and whatnot, there's that comparison to Brian Dawkins, of course. But, is it possible that in the very near future that he can turn into that hybrid type of player that can be more in the box as well?
They could try to develop him into that. When you look at what they did in the draft, I think, and he's one of the guys, they went and they picked winners. They took guys from programs that have won recently, and I don't know that I remember very many times in the past that they kind of have done that as much as they did this year. I don't know that that was necessarily the mold they were looking for, but you got guys who know how to win. And sometimes, I've heard other players talk about this, you can't manufacture what it feels like to win, and these guys know that feeling. And I think when you talk about him, for sure, Kayvon, I think he's a guy they want to develop. He might try to be the guy that Jim Schwartz identifies as one of those to perhaps be like a Malcolm Jenkins. Now, there is only one Malcolm Jenkins. There aren't a lot of guys that play the position the way he has, and perhaps you won't get another guy to do that. But I think they definitely have – I like what they did at that position in free agency as well as the draft, and I think there is potentially some hope there for the future, and he might be one of those guys who could be that way.
Talking with Scott Grayson, Football at 4, at SGrayson, Fox 29. Of course, you can check Scott out on Fox 29, sports anchor. Also, Grayson's grades on our website, 973ESPN.com. Kind of getting the grades for the Eagles all season and what they still need to do. And obviously, you mentioned Clowney. What do you think about that defensive end spot? You got Barnett, and I'm not sure. I don't know that anybody has a clear-cut, definitive feel about who and what Barnett is. But you got an aging Brandon Graham. Josh Sweat is also in the mix there. So, is getting a guy like Clowney a necessity, or do you like what they already have at that position?
I like what they have, although I do agree with you. It's not like I'd sit there and bet the house on what they have to be productive this year as best as they can. I think they have some really good pieces. I like what Derek Barnett has shown at times. I thought he was having a pretty good year when he got hurt before, and unfortunately, you never know what you're going to get after every injury if somebody's going to get back to form. And he's still, he really is following in the footsteps of the way Brandon Graham's career started here. And the question is, will he turn the corner like Graham did? Now, Graham's getting older. Fletcher Cox always deals with his double teams. So you look at that line, and I say to myself, look, if I can get a guy like Clowney at roughly the right price, I bring him in. And I still am not ruling out doing a deal with Jacksonville if they'll give up Yannick Ngakoue, and you can get him at roughly the right price for what he'll accept. I don't mind adding another piece to that line. I don't think it hurts because am not totally set that they're all going to be as productive as you want them to be or feel they can be. And I think Barnett is the biggest question mark of the bunch. You know, he could be the biggest X factor or he could be a bust. And that's just really hard for a team to go into a season not knowing what they're going to get out of that spot.
I'm interested, Scott, to get your take. We haven't caught up since the draft, and obviously everybody had an opinion on Jalen Hurts in the second round. And to kind of, I know you know, covering the Big 12, he only played the Big 12 the 1 year, and also Jalen Reagor, who had been a Big 12 guy. I'm interested to get your thoughts on the first two picks. Reagor was kind of a surprise pick at 21, and then Hurts, maybe the biggest surprise in the entire draft at 53.
Yeah, I would have loved to have known and been a fly on the wall as to the discussion going into taking Hurts. And now, there's several different ways in my mind. Like, I sat there like everybody else. Why that pick there? And in my head, I kind of started thinking, well, look, again, I talked about the mold that Doug Peterson has tried to form his roster on year after year. Well, you look, he's always wanted to have a good backup quarterback. And now you've got a backup that doesn't have NFL experience, which is than what he's had in the past. However, with Jalen Hurts, you get an athletic guy, and you get a guy who can be a backup, and perhaps, you know, have some trade value in the future if you still decide Wentz is a guy. By picking him, though, I mean, I also have this thought that they might be saying, look, if we go another year or two and Wentz gets hurt and Hurts shows us that he can play the position, there is a big difference in what you're paying Hurts for the next few years, what you're paying Wentz. And perhaps that they might end up seeing him as an insurance policy to not lose too much from the future. I also don't think that they will hesitate to put in some packages, get Hurts in the game every now and then in some way, shape, or form, whether they do it as a wildcat option or throw him out in the slot or do something. I think they'll get the kid's feet wet. But if he's your backup, you got to be careful you don't get him in harm's way or hurt because you know, we all know what's happened to Wentz in the past, and you definitely want to keep him healthy. But, yeah, that one is going to be fun to watch, what happens there and how it develops. And they might also, you know, I never put it past Howie to look down the road and feel I'm going to get a trade piece in my possession that I can use down the line. And at some point, injuries happen. You can trade a quarterback, get a piece sheet during the season. Perhaps that happens as well.
So let's ask this then. Did you hate the concept of taking a guy who might be a backup quarterback at 53 with other needs and players available there? Because there's a lot of people who say, look, I don't mind a backup quarterback, and I like Jalen Hurts. I just didn't like, put it this way. I don't mind the pick at all. I value what he brings to the table. I don't care that he might only play 10 snaps a game or maybe, you know, they might have a small package. Other people would say, hey, you could have got a guy that had a much bigger role on the team at that pick at number 53. So which side of the coin are you more intrigued by what he will bring, or were you more intrigued by what somebody else might have been able to give you at 53?
Yeah, I'm looking at the latter part of that. I kind of agree with everything you said. I don't mind the pick. I don't mind what he could give you. I do, however, think that you're not a roster that's like, hey, we're great everywhere. Let's go get perhaps the best player available at that point. And that's what I think they might have done. What it tells me is they looked at the draft board and they didn't like anything else. And so they felt like we're going to grab the best piece of the pie right here and see what we can do with it, how it plays out down the road. I think they're willing to see what happens. I don't know that they necessarily had a role in mind for him at that point. But I think, like you said, I think, you know, I like the pick. I don't necessarily know that I agree with where they took him. And that is, again, going to be remain to be seen. This could be one of those picks that we talk about for years, whether Howie nailed or Howie failed.
That sounds like a
so
good
what did
segment.
You think about?
That's a good segment. Howie nailed or Howie failed. There you go. We got to do something with that.
Yeah, that is something we can work with. So what did you feel about Jalen Reagor? I'm actually a fan of the pick. Is it a little bit of a reach at that spot? Possibly, but it wasn't going to go that much farther. It's not like you could have picked him.
It's because Justin Jefferson was the next pick. Those two guys are going to be constantly, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, everybody, again, that's another one. That is another one that everybody will look at Howie Roseman and say, you know, was that the right pick, or does Jefferson go on to have the better career? I don't mind the pick at all. Look, in my mind, all I wanted them to get was all I felt they needed to get with that pick was a receiver with speed who can preferably catch the ball more regularly than Nelson Aguilar did when you drafted him in the first round. So you look at Rager, and I think you've got an opportunity there to hit on a pick. A good young, speedy receiver, and they added more speed as well in the draft later on, which to me was only further evidence that they understood we've got to have speed and depth as well, depth being the key, because once Deshaun Jackson went down, just exposed that offense in every way, shape, and form. So, I like what they did on offense in the draft overall, and I'm, the other question will be, what do they do with Jason Peters if they bring him back at all? He's still hanging out there, and I know his agent's throwing out video of him working out and trying to prove he's ready. But, yeah, I like the pick of Rager. I think, you talk about the Big 12 receivers. There are several in this draft, but they haven't always hit. And I think that's going to be interesting to see whether or not Rager does become a big product here. I'm also curious, I was one of those people that didn't expect Alshon Jeffrey to be on this roster, come opening day. And I don't know if he and Carson Wentz have perhaps worked through their differences. But that's an interesting one to keep an eye on as well, because that's another receiver taking up spots for some of these other guys you just got.
Yeah. What do you think about Peters? I mean, that whole Dillard-Peters story I think is interesting because you trade up to get Dillard, and now you'll let Peters walk essentially, and now you're at the point where you might be, I don't want to say sticking your tail between your legs, but almost saying, maybe we made a mistake. Maybe because of this whole coronavirus thing that they felt not having Dillard in for training camp and mini camps and that stuff plays a factor, and they feel more comfortable going back. But I find the whole Peters-Dillard thing to be very interesting.
It is. I would compare it to what you're looking at Derek Barnett, what we just talked about with him. You don't know what you're going to get out of Barnett. I think you honestly don't know what you're going to get out of Dillard, and I think they're a little petrified. Left tackles, one of the most important positions on the line, if not the most. I mean, you're protecting Wentz's blind side. We know that. It's an important spot that they want to have somebody they feel totally comfortable in putting there. They've made it clear they don't want to move Lane Johnson from right tackle, and that's understandable. But you're right. Without the opportunity and the reps that you could continue to hammer Dillard with, that certainly opens up the opportunity to begin that dialogue, or perhaps they've already done that with Jason Peters. And look, I think he sent a message to Peters that, you've got to prove, you've got to play for us, as well. But
we'll see. Jason Peters still out there. That looms. The Carlos Hyde stuff and much more. Football at 4. Scott Grayson at the other guys chiming in. I will say, I do want to say that John McMullen from Football at 4 for the last 4 years has moved on. He has a opportunity that he just could not turn down, and John has moved on to a national platform. So I want to thank John for his time as being a part of Football at 4 every day for the last 4 years. We came up with this segment. We talked on the phone one time, and John said, what do you think about doing a segment on the NFL and the Eagles? And I said, yeah, I like it. Let's do it every day because, we didn't do that before. We used to do Eagles stuff here and there. I mean, mostly on a daily basis, but not at the same time every day. And I said, do you really think we can do it every single day? Like, you think like we're going to have enough to talk about? He said, yep. And sure enough, for 4 years, we talked football every day at 4 o'clock, and it was wildly popular. The YouTube videos were off the charts, and it was the number 1 rated segment on the number 1 rated afternoon drive show in the market. So I want to thank John for all the work he put in on that segment. I appreciate everything that he brought to the show. We leave on excellent terms, by the way. He has just moved on to a national platform. He had an opportunity with Sports Illustrated and some other things that allowed him to basically was going to take up a lot of his time to not be able to make the commitment every day at 4 o'clock like we've been doing the last couple of years. But I give it to John that he made the commitment to be on every day at 4 o'clock for the last 4 years. But we will keep football custody. We're working on some other things. Scott jumped in there today. Andrew is now a part of the team covering the Eagles, and we have some other things that we're hoping to iron out maybe by the end of the week. That Football at 4 will remain here on the Sports Bash. But I did want to give John a shout out. We're kind of going back and forth at trying to find a way to salvage the segment. He just has a lot going on with the Sports Illustrated and some other things that have come up. But football at 4 with John McMullen. It was a great run. I know a lot of people out there love John, respect John's opinions and work. But the segment will stay. Hunter and I will keep that football at 4 going in some capacity. And hopefully by tomorrow, we might have an update and announcement on it. So we look forward to that.